How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Classy Tech. This is my review of the Samsung S95B. The reason for that is the update, the infamous 12.11 Filmmaker update, made big enough changes that it was worthwhile to reevaluate, retest, and review the S95B. We're also a few months post-launch for the TV now, so some more things have come to light about it and was able to dig a bit deeper, as well as I've changed some of my testing methodology and things that I do test for now, so I am able to dive a bit deeper into this. But first, we're going to start off with the meat and potatoes of the review that most people are going to want to know, and that is the Filmmaker update really did make Filmmaker mode very good for HDR. So if you are looking for a bright, impactful OLED for HDR, and you want perfect black levels with great color gamut, color volume, and accurate EOTF now, this should be pretty high on your list. The TV gets plenty bright. It is the brightest OLED to date. It's unlikely that that will change this year, and the color brightness is also higher than any previous OLED. There's many strong attributes to the S95B with HDR content, and there are some small complaints and issues. However, they are not going to affect most people, or at least altogether they wouldn't. Pretty much think of two pillars. One really big pillar that's your HDR performance, and that's what most people care about. And then take another pillar and chop it up into little tiny segments of things that aren't so great or could be improved, and only some of those are going to affect each individual person, and you still have the really big strong pillar. So that's why this TV should be on your list when you're shopping for a new OLED this year, or even if you're comparing a bright LCD like one of Samsung's QLEDs, you should be looking at this TV as well if HDR, impact, performance, and color are at the top of your priority list. And this TV is an example of a case where you have something that's very good at what it does well, but it does lose a little bit of the basics. So we'll cover that later, but let's start with, again, HDR is great. The cleanliness of the panel, for one thing, is really good, and then when you add in that the white looks really good, especially when it's at D65, and the fact that it can get pretty bright with a large area of white on the screen, that is where it does really well compared to other OLEDs. It also leads to a more balanced look between white and your skin tones, or at least an easier to achieve balance. So scenes like this really look natural and clean, and it has just excellent dynamic range, or perceived dynamic range, with true zero OLED blacks and being able to get upwards of 1,000 nits. And then when you have a scene like this with that stark contrast and those shadows, it just really does well, giving you that three-dimensionality look, and the shadow detail is pretty good. And then your highlights can hold on to color well, and the tone mapping of the TV works well for this 4,000 nit content. So this is definitely one of the best HDR performing TVs that you can buy in 2022. And between the 12.11 update and some basic setting changes you can see in my previous settings video, you can achieve pretty decent results in the Filmmaker modes, and okay results for game, depending on how much of a stickler you are for accuracy. So in SDR, colors are still going to be a bit off, and in game, they're off as well, and we'll go into that stuff more later. And if you are interested, I did a live stream going over a ton of measurements before and after the update, so I'll have that in the description for you, so we don't have to fill up this video full of charts and graphs. Alright, so at this point, that's most of what a lot of you need to hear, and you can go look at one. And if you're going to decide on getting one, consider going through Value Electronics. I'll have a link below through Robert Zahn, and let him know that Classy sent you. Alright, now another big thing about this TV that you've probably heard is about its gaming performance, and this is where there might be some conflict. but for most people, I'm talking the largest portion of the people who are looking at this TV, they will be ecstatic with the game mode and how gaming looks on it. Now the reason for that is there's really not much you can do to make the game mode accurate, especially in HDR. However, it's not crazy, wild, vivid looking. You can still have your white balance and everything right. Colors are just going to be oversaturated. Your midtones will be overbrightened. HGIG still has tone mapping on top, so you lose some of the details in the highlights, things like that. Dark, shadowy areas are a little bit brighter than they should be, which can take away from some of the atmospheric dark games. But again, most people don't worry too much about that stuff, and they're just going to see a very bright, colorful image with very low input lag and very bright SDR gaming capabilities, and not worry about it. Also, another strong suit is reflection handling is among the best that I have seen. Nothing crazy shoots across the screen when a light hits it, and the TV is plenty bright enough to beat most reflections. So, speaking of brightness, with the new Filmmaker 1211 update, it no longer hits 1500 nits in the smaller window sizes. However, it still is just over 1000 in your highlights and a little over 200 full field, so it is still plenty bright for an OLED. So let's now start to look at some of the issues that it does have. And again, these are not going to affect everyone individually. Some may not affect you, and some of them you probably wouldn't see or notice anyway. Alright, so for the first thing I'm going to show is game mode gamma in SDR with the 2.2 setting as an average gamma of 2, and the 2.2 setting is non-adjustable, so if we go to BT 1886, which should raise it, it actually drops it to 1.9, which makes no sense. So that's one of the issues with SDR game mode. And then if we go into game HDR with the P3 color setting, we can see most of the colors are not terribly oversaturated. Red is, but if we go to BT 2020 setting, then there's lots of oversaturation, and the problem here is the color gamut is not that wide in P3. So in movie mode, using BT 2020, you get just about 90% coverage, and if you drop that down to P3 in movie mode, you get 74%, but if you're in P3 in game mode, you only get 68%. It's lower than movie mode, and that includes Filmmaker also. So the issue there is you have to have more oversaturated colors by selecting BT 2020 in order to have the proper gamut coverage that you need for a lot of HDR content. And so while that's more of an issue for game mode, it still applies somewhat to movie mode. So if you want more information, check out my settings video. Alright, for another issue area, motion, especially with high contrast scenes, dark by bright. The problem is the TV is slow to come out of black, so there is ghosting and smearing that is visible in those kinds of scenes. And on top of that, there is artifacts and artificial smoothing that is applied even when motion settings are fully disabled. So if you are going to use motion settings or the judder reduction, I suggest a low number. And for a lot of people, you probably won't notice the motion problems, but motion is such a person-to-person, personal preference type thing. It is something that you should keep in mind, that it is not the best when it comes to motion, and if you fully turn off all the processing and all the motion settings, it still will not turn everything off. It does have over-processing with everything off, and not just for motion. And that's one of the issues with low bitrate content, not necessarily just low resolution, but low bitrate. So you can see there's more posterization or banding in lower 8-bit content, and then on streaming content, you can see things like aliasing or over smooth areas, digital noise reductions. Sharpness is also getting overly smooth. Using 720p pattern here, you can see the scaling is fine, so the scaling is not an issue at 720p or 1080p. However, the sharpness, there is still something being applied when all of the settings are disabled, and that can result in artifacts, issues, ringing, overly smooth images, details just being completely deleted, like very small individual hairs, when compared to another display that is not having processing of that type of stuff, where you will see each and every little individual hair. Whereas on Samsung, not just this one, but their other models too, with clarity turned off, like the whole entire clarity menu, and sharpness at 0, there is small details that do just get erased as it is trying to smooth out images, and faces can have pores disappear, things like that. And for the last minute or so, I've been showing these 720p and 1080p demo content to show how some of this stuff looks, as it would represent like the best quality for 720p and 1080p. Whereas if you were streaming content, you know, there's times your 4K streams can not only drop in resolution, but sometimes they'll keep 4K resolution, but drop the bitrate so low that it can manifest a lot of these issues more so. And again, most people are not going to see this or notice it. It would take having another display near its overall performance and image quality, but without the processing issues, and a source going through a splitter for you to be able to see this. So again, most people will not care. They won't even know that it's happening. However, if you're an enthusiast, this may be something that bothers you, and you would want to know that if you went with something else, then you could be getting more detail. So I do have a previous video on some of the other small issues with the TV, so I'm not going to go over all of them again, but these are the new things that I've been focusing more on, and again, they're fairly minor, especially for most people. So overall, the TV is still great. It is excellent with HDR. The Filmmaker mode really did help it to not over brighten things anymore, and it definitely gets a recommendation for HDR content if that's your main focus. Gamers, it's going to be, for most of them, they're going to be ecstatic with it. Very bright SDR, punchy HDR, and that's what a lot of people want for gaming. However, if you are someone who values accuracy in your game mode, then this would not be the TV for you. And if you value accuracy in your processing and details as well, then you may want to look elsewhere as well. So that's it. I'm not going to keep going too much further on this, so let's just go ahead and end it. And thank you all for watching. I hope this helps you out, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good one.